Go through the real introduction, I wanted to take a moment and ask for everyone to silence your cell phones as not to disturb the program. So it's with great pleasure that we're presenting tonight's conversation with Don and Mira Rubell, moderated by Dr. Pedro Maracavallo, Deputy Director of Arts and Programs here at the Asian Art Museum. And this is the culminating program for the exhibition 28 Chinese, which originated from the Rubell family collection in Miami and represents over a decade of research, studio visits, and collecting of Chinese contemporary art. Between 2001 and 2012, the Rubells embarked on 6 research trips to China, visiting 100 artist studios during that time and built this remarkable part of their collection. And if you haven't seen the exhibition yet, or want to see it again, 28 Chinese closes this Sunday, so hopefully you'll have time to see it this weekend before it heads to the San Antonio Museum. So I'm gonna keep everything brief, because I'm looking forward to learning more about the experience, researching, and meeting these artists, as well as the Rubells collecting practice. The museum wanted to recognize the generous support of the China Art Foundation, Goretti and Lawrence Louis, Silicon Valley Bank, William Matthews Brooks, Lucy Sun, and Warren Felsen, which made the presentation of this exhibition at the museum possible. And I also was just informed by the museum store that they are offering all attendees to this program 10% off. It's a special deal, so it's all written in pen on my notes. Just mention that you're here for the Rubell conversation and they will provide you with that 10% discount. So if you haven't bought the catalog, that's just a little pitch. So without further ado, please welcome Don, Mira, and Pedro. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good evening. Welcome to the Asian Art Museum. Mira and Donald, this is such a privilege to have you again after 2 months. You are back in San Francisco. I presume you liked it the first time, so thank you. Thank you for your generosity. We are just discussing how are we going to live without the boat, the Zhu Qinji, from Monday onwards, because it's such a monumental piece, and so people really love it. So you just came back from LA. I've heard, and you visit quite a few studios, so you are continuing your tradition of going around and any comments on these? Any acquisitions, recent acquisitions, any names that you'd like to suggest to our guests?
Well, I do have to say LA has a lot of traffic.
That's absolutely true.
We were there for 2 days. We were up at 7 every morning and asleep at 11 at night. We saw 10 studios, probably 24 hours total time, of which 22 hours were spent in the car. So, but they were very good artists in LA.
So on another note, so we arrived, let's say at 1 o'clock this morning, this afternoon in San Francisco, and David and Linda Lee met us immediately at the hotel, no time for changing or anything. And we went to, let's see, we took a trip through Chinatown and stopped in a few places to have some crabs and some clams and some delicious Chinese food. So we liked to taste the place, and it made us feel like we were back in Beijing and taking all those trips, because in addition to visiting 100 studios, we do travel on our stomach. So.
You had some time in Aspen with family, and I know it's quite amazing how you have managed to create this very close together family with your son and daughter, and they are part of your interests, obviously, and they're part of the collection, or they are...
Let's put it this way. Usually little kids learn about dinosaurs, memorizing the names of dinosaurs. In our family, they have to recognize, they get rewarded for recognizing the name and the image of artists. So our 2.5-year-old is being whipped into shape.
Yeah, but the amazing thing is that usually the sons and daughters of great collectors do not like what their parents collect. and you managed to create an artist, and I imagine to live under you must be also puts also a pressure on your daughter. I'm speculating here, of course, and your son works closely with you. How did you manage to do this? Because usually it's really unusual.
You can't pressure anybody into being an artist, but Jennifer resisted, like most kids, going to the galleries and going to the museum. She absolutely resisted. But there's a moment when it's compelling. There's a moment when they come around. But interesting enough, Don, our grandchildren are much more receptive. I mean, our 2.5-year-old really he's really remembering like I would say like half of our highlights catalog. It's shocking to us, but we could never do that with our children. But our grandchildren are actually more receptive.
Our children we had to bribe, and we had a very simple method. Those were the days when Soho had all the galleries, and we would say, if you go to 5 galleries, you get an ice cream cone, and if you go to 10 galleries, you get to play basketball in the park. And it actually, bribery does work, and I'm really disappointed with our grandchildren that they're not really pushing us for bribes. But maybe it gets better after each generation.
It's very joyful. It's really great.
It is. So, other than having fun, going around the world and visiting studios of artists, you also work. And you have hotels in several American cities. Are you planning to open something in San Francisco, since you enjoy it so much and you've been coming? You have hotels in Baltimore, D.C., and Miami, correct? Right.
No one could afford to open a hotel in San Francisco. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, people open hotels here, they just lose money. I mean, it's amazing. They're beautiful hotels, though.
Yes. What about Baltimore and what is going on in Baltimore? I mean, you have a great hotel there, but the situation in Baltimore is quite...
you know, it's interesting. There's no question that artists, like all of you, either are artists or you know artists, collectors, there's something about the way looking at art opens your eyes to possibilities and seeing the invisible. And Baltimore, to us, was really kind of recognizing an invisible jewel. It's one of the great cities in America that... I like that. I like that. So if you're from Baltimore, it happens to be the most invisible opportunity in America. It has museums, it has art schools, it has amazing people that are totally unpretentious and truly cool. Like they don't even know how, you know, like really cool people don't even, they're not aware of their coolness. That's how cool Baltimore is. So it's having a hard time because it's in a serious transition. But it's interesting what really happened in Baltimore. It's a kind of rebellion, but the way in which the community pulled into this unfortunate disturbance is very touching. I mean, by the way, the mayor came to see our show here. You met the mayor of Baltimore. So we're kind of adopted citizens of Baltimore, and I'm very proud of it. But we felt that way about Miami when people said, what, Miami? Culture Miami? Yeah, so listen, I think art gives us courage to like take on, it's like the neighborhood that the artist moves into that everyone thinks is like you wouldn't be caught dead in the neighborhood, but meanwhile, give it a few years and all of a sudden you realize that artists point us in the right direction.
Donald, any comment? Because you buy art that's very often, it can be described as transgressive. You do care about social issues, you don't mind to show and to buy and to exhibit in your wonderful museum some very daring artworks. So Baltimore was...
Let me say something about Baltimore. Like, this is a hotel that was from 1928. It was the only hotel that wasn't still operating as a hotel from that period. A 440-room hotel that was literally going to be shut down. And literally every single person in that city had some relative who had been married in that hotel, who had learned how to dance with their dad in that hotel. It was a privilege to really take over. And plus, you could never buy a hotel like this for the price that we paid for it. But this is what happens when you follow contemporary art. It just shows you the invisible. I mean, come join me in Baltimore. You'll make a fortune there.
But you know, Baltimore, in a certain sense, epitomizes all of America. I mean, what we're looking at now is a painful transition in all of America's inner cities, and I don't, you know, I think that people's heart the heart is in the right place. All the young people are transitioning into the city. And by the way, San Francisco is shocking to us because we remember 20 years ago where you weren't able to walk through parts.
It was 40 years ago, Don. 40.
40 years ago when people weren't able to walk through parts of San Francisco. And now everywhere you look, there's an energy and a vitality, and I just hope that Baltimore might accomplish the same thing. I mean, it would help if they had some good Chinese restaurants, but can't have everything.
A few years ago, you opened this exhibition, 30 American. It was, I believe, the first time that someone did such a great show on with 30 African American artists.
It's going to be 8 years ago.
8 years ago already.
Yeah, because it was like our show opened in December, and President Obama was...
I'm sorry, but that was the 30 Americans.
You asked about the 30 Americans.
I did, yes.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
We'll go to the Chinese very soon.
No, the inauguration was in January, and we've been working on that show for 3 years. And everyone told us not to do that show because it just seemed, for any white person we spoke to, they thought it was very awkward for white collectors to do this focus on a African-American show. But it took us 3 years, not that we asked permission of the artist, but we did want a kind of consensus that it wasn't, I wanted them to know our intention. Our intention was to celebrate these artists that were in our collection for, in some cases, 30, 40 years.
But in a sense, we don't plan to do shows. I mean, shows choose themselves. With the 30 Americans, what we realized is that over the prior 5 years, some of the most interesting artists we were seeing were African American artists. And as we realized that, we said something is happening here, and then we realized that over the 25 years prior to that, we had collected a number of African American artists. And then we thought, and we said, you know, let's try and put this together and synthesize. You know, there are two ways to do an exhibition. One is the traditional museum idea way, is that you have an idea and then you have the artist, you fill the spots with the idea. Ours seems to be generated more by the art itself. When we sense that something interesting is happening, when we see interesting artists, we form an exhibition around the concept of the interesting
I understand
artist.
that we never borrow works for an exhibition. And as collectors, those of you who collect know that you can't buy everything, you can't look at everything. It's a huge universe. So where do you put your attention? What do you focus? And we have found that, well, creating this public space that we have in Miami, and please, you're all, if you haven't been to us, please come. You're personally invited. It gives us a way to focus on where we want to look, where we want to go. And at a certain point, it becomes clear that we have a story to tell. And the story is so compelling and we can draw from it. Just imagine if you can go into your own warehouse and put together this 28 Chinese or 30 Americans. And once we have a hunch that that's possible, then we really dig into it. And we add, and we explore, and we realize that we can tell, that it's an opportunity and a privilege to tell a story. So.
But were you surprised about the success? I mean, the show is going to open in the Detroit Institute of Arts very soon. So after 8 years, it's still traveling around the country.
Actually, this show seems never to stop traveling. It's been seen by just past its 1 millionth visitor, and somehow. Among those 1 million visitors were President Obama, his wife, who saw it twice, and their children. And it probably was the first time that a president ever walked from the White House to the
Across the
Corcoran
mall.
Museum to see an exhibition. So.
And the work, how many of you have seen the 30 Americans? Anyone here? Oh, wow. I love that. So come, it's interesting, we just got an email from the curator at, from the Detroit Institute who said they're getting emails from people who have seen the show 3 times and they're looking forward to see it a 4th time. And I thought, wow, I hope that you'll feel that way about the 28 Chinese when you go to, perhaps you'll go visit in other institutions. The thing that's so wonderful about it is that we work very closely, as you know, with the curator, with yourself, it becomes a collaboration. We don't instruct on how any show that we send into a other museum should be hung or should be explained or should be talked about. So it becomes a true collaboration. The work arrives in the museum, but the team then creates what fits that museum. Like in the case of your beautiful Asian Art Museum here, it's incredible to see this work in the context of the ancient, inside the ancient galleries. I mean, that was not an opportunity in our space. In our space, it was about just seeing it as contemporary work relating to itself. But here, seeing this work in the ancient gallery, seeing our family's breath in one of the sculptures in this ancient gallery with, it's very moving, and it connects the past and the present, and clearly everything that was the past was a contemporary at some point.
And you know, what's interesting is I think it looks better here than it did in our place.
Thank you.
And that's,
by far.
I mean, it's fantastic, but it's sort of like with your children. You never get jealous of your children. Similarly, when we saw how good it looked here, it made us feel more happy than jealous.
I just want to say this is the first time we've ever been interviewed where we didn't interrupt each other. We're turning over a new leaf today. You feel it? Do you feel the cooperation here? Because usually what's going on here, Don?
You're just exhausted from the visit to
Chinatown.
No, 50, you understand, last year we celebrated 50 years together, and all of that time we've been, Now, you're applauding because it's to the same person 50 years.
Yeah.
Because the other day we were at this dinner and he said, yeah, I'm married 50 years. And Don says, wait a minute, with the same woman? He was like, oh, that's impossible.
But there is a secret, right? Why you are together for 50 years, I read somewhere.
Well.
The art, the collection.
Actually, it's such a good secret, I don't remember why.
No, there is something about waking up every morning with a person who actually wants to talk about what you really want to talk about. I don't know how I don't know how this happened, but we do get up every morning. We're up like at 6, like sometimes 5. It's getting earlier and earlier as we get older, but we do get up very early, and it's crazy how we'll spend 2 hours talking about art. I mean, it's like it's kind of upset. It's totally overwhelming.
It's wonderful. Mira and Donald and Jason, the son, discuss and they have to agree in order to acquire something. And I wonder, when you don't agree, what happens? I mean, you have to have fights sometimes. Come on.
We fight well, no, what I didn't mention is we wake up in the morning. First, we have a fight.
Oh, okay.
What I didn't mention is Mira has a fight. I don't fight. I'm actually.
Which means that I don't think that means that I win. I think that in the margins of the fight builds an understanding of why one of us, or 2 out of the 3 of us, is compelled to want a particular work to be added to the collection. I remind you that it's a huge responsibility. So the last thing in the world we need is another work of art, because with every work of art comes an enormous responsibility, as you well all know, being in the museum. I mean, you know what it means to store it, to archive it, to protect it, to be responsible for it. So we don't need another work of art. So if we don't agree, and one of us is passionate about it, we have to make a good case for it. And I think in the margins of this argument, a consensus comes about that makes the three of us become convinced that it should be.
Well, actually, in the course of 50 years, once I bought a work without reaching consensus. Assuming that I was the senior member, I thought it was rank has its privileges. They made my life so miserable that it was the only time in 50 years that we ever returned a work of art.
But listen, the thing is that it's not like, you know, people think of collectors like these industrialists, you know, like they have endless money. I mean, when we got married, I was earning $100 a week and Don was in medical school. And when we walked the streets of New York and fell into these studios that were then live, work, retail spaces that at the time, you know, New York was so depressed that you could get a place, a retail space as a studio and live space. And we figured out that the artists they needed the collector, and we grew to love the privilege of owning a work of art. And we discovered that a payment plan there's no problem with that. So anyway, you fast forward, nothing has changed. We're still on payment plans and we're still paying off art. But it's always a financial struggle, no matter what. It's always a financial struggle. So if we're going to do it, we have to agree. And if couples, a lot of couples need therapy on this subject because there's a lot of couples can get into real struggles over this because one spends the money that they don't know about and it becomes a secret, and then, I mean, it can become pretty nasty between people.
Well, my favorite story on this, when J.P. Morgan, the founder of the Morgan Library, died, the press came to his mistress and told him that he had died. And she said, "Oh, thank God." And they were amazed at this. And why do you say that? He said, because in 2 years he would have been broke from all the art he was buying. So I always think of that, and no matter how little or how much money you buy, if you collect art, you're going to be broke anyway, so it doesn't matter.
And can you tell us about a work of art that you decide not to buy, and that's up to this day,
wow.
You still think about it?
Oh, boy. When
Well, okay.
John Curran was a young artist, Andrea Rosen, who was his dealer, came over the house and showed us the work, and Mira kind of liked it, and
No, I really liked it, Dawn.
Okay,
You're the one who
really-
didn't like it. And so Andrea Rosen, okay, no, really, I really liked it. And Don didn't, he hated it, actually. Let's be, okay. So he said, oh,
You're
they're
always
so
honest
ugly.
on my
They're
feelings.
so ugly. So Andrea Rosen, she was just opening the gallery. She was very fond of this artist. She really believes in John Curran. So she said, I'm going to do something that only in old-fashioned days they used to do. I said, what's that? She says, I'm going to give it to you, I'll give it to you to live with, and you can decide if you like it or not. So she said, and in fact, I'm going to give you like 4 of them, 4 paintings for you to see how you live with it, and maybe you can convince Don. And so these 4 paintings arrive. We hang them in our living room, and you know what? Don came to really like them.
I wouldn't go quite that far. But all right.
I don't know if you remember Edo Bolt. Anybody remember Edo Bolt? Remember? No? You remember Edo Bolt? Anyway, this is, we have a 50-year history. Some of these people are dead already, but he's not dead yet. Anyway, he comes over the house, Edo, and he says, looks at them, he says, what is this? I said, this, young artist. He says, I always believed in your eye. I always believed in your taste, but this is the worst. This is the worst I've ever seen. And that was the end of it. So my whole case got thrown out the window. And sure enough, I said, Andrea, I was so close, but then Edo Bolt came over the house and he didn't like it. I mean, sometimes we don't collect like this. This was in the old days.
By the way, it was the last time we ever asked anyone's
no one could come
advice.
over to our house and give and say anything to us which would deter. It wouldn't happen like that anymore. But for some reason, that's how it happened. So anyway, John Curran is not in our collection. We did buy him later on, but these magnificent paintings, which were like treasures, are not in our collection. So that Don, that you have yourself to blame.
But yeah, always, always. But usually, if one person feels strong enough, and they fight long enough, we might or might not come around to it. But Don, it's not
an irrational fight. I mean, you have to really bring cause why this piece is important. And it's not just, I love this piece, but usually there's a lot of research. Once we disagree, the fun really begins. Because then we really have to create an argument why. Now, you know, Matthew's sitting here shaking his head because he's witnessed our family making decisions together.
It's, you know, democracy is a very bloody form. Everyone knows that.
It is a terrible system, yes. But Mira, now for you. When you visited Asia for the first time to see your works, the 28 Chinese, in the Buddhist art galleries, Donald was thrilled with some of our artworks, if you don't mind, our own.
Well, he also bought all the books on Asian art.
That's absolutely true. But then he told me, oh, I would love to start to collect Buddhist art.
Yes.
And you were a bit not so happy about the idea. So any progress on this conversation?
Well, the thing you have to understand about our relationship, which I will share with you, is the truth of the matter is that I wouldn't be the collector. I mean, the collectors do have a gene. There's a gene called collector gene.
Some people call it a defective gene,
but he has that gene. You know, he collected baseball cards, he collected stamps. I, on the other hand, come from a tradition where you stay light on your feet. I mean, I come from a family, you know, that barely survived World War II. And my father was always about, be ready to run, be ready to, you know, what are you going to take with you? But it better be light and fast, and don't burden yourself. So it's taken a long time for me to have the mentality of collecting and feeling secure enough to have the responsibility for the treasures that we, you know, the kind of the culture of our time. It's a big responsibility. So I've had to grow into becoming a collector, and the collaboration is what's so exciting. But on my own, no, I wouldn't be a collector.
Lest you feel sorry for it, I want you to look at this piece and talk about picture running across borders with this object.
So, well, any further thoughts about collecting Buddhism? I'm sorry, no. I have to.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I was hoping you wouldn't quite bring it up, but all summer long I've been putting books about Buddhism on the table in the living room.
Well, as soon as we finish, Don, as soon as we finish for the next year, we're going to be doing over 100. Our next show is called 100% All Women Artists. So as soon so. Because in the way that, you know, as I said, you know, we see, we have a story, we realize we have a story to tell of amazing, talented women. That we have over 180 women artists in our collection. I mean, it's like we never even thought about, we never counted before, we just collect talent. And then we realize, wow, we have so many amazing women artists.
How are you going to select the works to be in this exhibition?
That's going to be tough. That's a whole conversation. And of course, our wonderful director, who you met and worked with, is engaged in this curation of how we're going to present the talented women
Actually,
artists.
it's 181 because we found this wonderful woman artist in Los Angeles yesterday. So now it becomes even more difficult.
Did you buy the entire show, or did you buy as usual, or
pretty much the whole studio?
No. That's Don. But let's be specific. She is going to make 4 paintings for us, and we're
in addition to the other paintings which we found.
And tell us about the Rubell effect. I'm sure you have heard about this.
What is that?
Well, because you arrive, you buy something, and you usually buy not 1 or 2 pieces, you buy a few, and suddenly the prices go up because collectors and the market knows that the Rubells have acquired some works. I'm sure you have heard about this.
You know, we really do what we do, and
anyone that listens to us is crazy. I have to tell you, point blank.
We fall in love hard, And I said to somebody the other day, you know, someone said, you buy art, and somebody at the table said, I think you collect art. You create these stories, and you create a focus on an artist's work. So the reason we'll want to buy as much work as we do by a single artist very early is because we want to tell it. It's always about telling the story, and it's hard to tell a story with one piece. Sometimes you can't help it. I mean, you're lucky if you get the one piece of an artist that adds a spice into the story you're dealing with. Like, for example, we only have 2 works of David Hammond's in the 30 Americans, or we only have, you know, I mean, you have what you can get, but wherever there's an opportunity for us to tell a story in depth of an artist that we really, really like and think is important in the ongoing history of our collection, we'll make every effort to do that. So the reason he can't buy his Buddha, back to your question, is because are we going to buy a Buddha? Or, I mean, I love Buddha, but I mean, the Buddhas that we see, it's incredible. I mean, can you imagine if we had this context in our collection?
I'm not prepared to say we're not buying Buddha.
No, but I'm saying, I mean, are we going to do that? Are we going to buy these are we going to have this amazing artist that we just met, who's, by the way, been working for the last 20 years and has just, you know, exploded. And she has seen Buddha. I mean, it's amazing to find an artist who's 50 years old and all of a sudden has seen her vision. You know, and we're there.
She's trying to avoid this Buddha question. I can feel it.
Very clever, yes. Do you manage to establish a relationship and keep going with this relationship with the artists? Because it's very difficult. You know so many. How can you do it? Do you have time?
We always, even in this trip to Los Angeles, I mean, 4 of the studios with artists we've already collected. But I mean, someone like Keith Haring, when we bought the first piece he oversold, and then we bought the last piece the day before he died. So we try to go as long as we can. Other artists like Jeff Koons, we bought work from every single show until it finally, the prices looked like telephone numbers and we had to stop.
Well, no, actually, the first piece was not a piece we bought. What happened is that we used to have these parties. I think Mark and Hazel were at that party, friends from way back. So during one of the, after the Whitney Biennial party, the day after, it always had hundreds of, everyone from the Whitney would just walk over to our house for this. It was kind of a drop-in crash party. Everyone thought that somebody else got an invitation, but the truth is we never sent out invitations. Everybody crashed. So, so the day after this Whitney party, the bell rings, and we said, who is it? And he said, it's Jeff. I said, Jeff who? He said, well, Jeff Koons. I still didn't know who that was because who knew who Jeff Koons was? This was 1978. And so I went downstairs, opened the door. I said, well, what are you here for? He said, I'm here for the Whitney party. I said, I'm so sorry. This was the party last night. And he was so disappointed. He was practically in tears that he missed this party. And
either that or embarrassed.
No. Well, we invited him. Said, "Well, we're just sitting down to have some pasta. Why don't you join us?" So anyway, he joined us for pasta. We got to meet him as a young artist in New York. Told us about his work. The next day, he sent us an inflatable flower, and that was like that. That inflatable flower ended up at the Whitney Museum, a retrospective of Jeff Koons just a few months ago. So that was the first piece that.
So what happens when you visit a studio that you really like the work and you find the artist extremely annoying?
That happened. That actually happened just yesterday.
And the name of this artist is?
No, it was interesting because this was a very young artist and very talented. Not, needed another 5 years. But we thought, maybe we should it didn't, our personalities didn't get along actually. It just didn't work. But sometimes, things just don't work out.
And if the personalities don't work out, you do
No,
not?
it's
or
irrelevant. Sometimes
Depends how good the
the
artist
art
is.
yeah.
So you are
If the
prepared
artist is
Yeah.
to
good
control
enough,
your emotions in order to have another great work of
we'll
art.
absorb all kinds of abuse if the artist is good enough. And if not, we use that as an excuse.
Yeah, I think.
You agree with me?
Yes,
Totally.
and
No,
tell
I
us,
have to
okay, let's go back to 28 Chinese. When you arrived here and you went to, you saw the boat, we went through the galleries, what do you feel when you see
You know what?
your
I tell you
artworks?
what I feel. I feel like this boat should be installed as the public is allowed into the museum. I was thinking because you guys cannot imagine how much love, attention, and devotion it takes to put together
You
this
cannot
piece.
imagine the
Okay.
hundreds of hours of work that are,
It's incredible. The staff here was unbelievable. First of all, we leave our babies here, and I can tell you that after being here when it was first opened and spending time with your whole registrar, the supporting staff is what gives confidence for us to leave our babies here. It's like, I just want you to know that.
Thank you, on behalf of the Asian.
It was one of the most impressive visits of the inner core of a museum. If you haven't been downstairs to see just the loving care that the artwork gets around here, it's incredible, because it's easy once it's in the galleries, but how it's preserved, how it's cared for, how it's all the work that goes on behind the scenes is unbelievable. And this is one of the most impressive features of this museum. It was really amazing. And I think, wait a minute, I can't see too well. That you guys, right? You're the ones. Oh my God. You have no idea how these babies are put to sleep every night. But I think...
I must thank here, Alison Harding was the curator of the exhibition. She was the part-time curator here at Asian, and we invited her as guest curator, so she was in charge, and we worked very closely on the galleries on the second and third floor.
It was all her decisions as to where the work was going to go. And it took vision, it took imagination, it took scholarship, and it took a lot of handling of all of this work, and all the security people. Everybody was like so amazing here. But this piece, but the public never gets to see what it takes to install work. This is 9,000 work. No, this piece was, okay. You're going to argue over 1,000 pieces?
Lots of
Okay, between 8,000 and 9,000 pieces. You had to crumble them, you had to hang them, you had to, when we first hung it in our collection, we had to arrange through DC to have, through Washington, to get Washington connections to get his staff, the artist staff, to come to Miami to help us, because they thought we were importing laborers to Chinese laborers who were trying to, leave China to help us install this. But here at the museum, your staff was unbelievable.
Yes, and I must thank also our, one of our regissers that is going to San Antonio. The exhibition is traveling to San Antonio, and she's traveling with the boat to install it there, because she really developed the technology.
The technique.
The technique.
So these are 8,000 pieces. I think, do you mind if I ask them, anyone here to volunteer if they want to come to help deinstall this? Oh, there we go. We have a few volunteers. It's very special. There's something to be said about artwork where the artist asks the public to get dirty, down and dirty, to help. Like if you've ever installed a Richard Long, like if you had to lift up those rocks and put them into the circle, which he invites you to do, which I've done several times, it's amazing. You really feel like you understand the power of the work just by physically engaging with it, or cutting out another version of a Carol Walker piece, or placing a Carl Andre across. We have this 200-foot piece of Carl Andre to help install that. It says something. It means something.
Okay, you visit 100, over 100 studios
Yeah.
during 10 years, and you selected quite a few, as we all know. Shall we go through some of the artists, and perhaps you would like to comment? And
Well, this is Zhang Wan and Lulu, and everything has a story. So this is the story of Zhang Wan. There was a show that you showed here, Inside Outside, that was shown in the Asian Society in New York. And Mira, for some reason, wasn't able to go to the opening, and I went without her, and someone introduced me to Zhang Wan, and I can't tell you how impressed I was, and I called Mira that night, and I said, I met an artist who's an absolute genius, and she said, well, what did he say? And I said, I don't know, he doesn't speak English. But, you know, sometimes you could really feel the genius in an artist. So Mira came to New York the next day, and we went to visit his studio. And the studio was above a beauty parlor, and he was he was supporting himself working in a hospital in a mortuary, and also waiting on tables, I guess?
No, washing dishes.
Washing dishes, okay. I always wash the dishes, so I should have known that. And he was just amazing, and Mira met him, and we were just all completely overwhelmed. And
well, this just was I hadn't even, this is before even seeing the work. Sometimes you meet people that are just so compelling, and this was such a person.
So we became very good friends with minimal communication, and we decided we would go to China together, and this was 2001.
Well, we ended up traveling for 6 weeks with him and his wife, and it was an amazing trip. And so but it's interesting, he didn't, it's not that he introduced us to so many artists, but he introduced us to what felt like every intellectual across China. Everywhere we went, he would have these gatherings of intellectuals talking about art. Because in those days, it's like, you didn't like make art because there was no really big market for the art, but he was intent on introducing us to all these intellectuals. And one time we went up to, and we went to change, we were going out to dinner, we went up to the room to change, and they were waiting for us in the lobby. And when we went upstairs, we put on the TV just like to, you know, catch up on what's going on. And we saw the World Trade Center bombing.
Well, no, we actually didn't know it was the World Trade Center. We thought this was a movie in China.
We thought it was some fiction.
And we didn't know what it was. And then as we were watching it, it became more and more real, and we realized that
so when we walked downstairs and told them this was happening, it was just interesting how, and then the whole street when we went out, everybody had already heard about it, and how sympathetic and caring the community that we encountered in China felt about what was happening.
Actually, the amazing thing is, as you would walk down the street, people would walk up to you and say, I'm very sorry. And it was very profound.
what do you feel when you help the artists becoming more well-known? And
we don't think about like we're helping artists. We're just so lucky. We feel so fortunate that we are able to meet talented people and engage with them and create the kind of story, and then become part of a story that we can tell.
I'm sure there are quite a few collectors here. Any advice for some members in the audience?
Find your story. Find your story. Just like an artist, find your vision, find your story. Decide what you want to, what are you interested in? What conversation can you have with your co-partner to talk about, engage, explore? I mean, for us, I can't tell you the joy of, you know, traveling throughout LA or traveling throughout China or going, we went to Poland at one point. We went to Poland several times to do an exhibition on Poland. I mean, it's like an adventure that we engage in together, and it's actually quite a miracle that we find these amazingly talented people. But you would too if you took this trip, if you took these trips and talked about the art of 2 hours a day, and sought out the smart people that we find to talk to and engage with, you would find you would find talented people too.
It's not really that hard. I mean, you don't do anything. You just look at the artist. So it's not that hard. It's just
it's just being open.
The talent is overwhelming if you're willing to accept it.
You just have to be open and not. We don't go out. We don't know what we're looking for because it's not what we're looking for. It's what we find. But we're always open to find. So in this case, it was January. It was really, really cold, and we're in this amazing studio with an artist who is. This is a traditional tea ceremony, and this is our son, our daughter-in-law, and Don. I'm usually the photographer, and we're having tea to warm up. And this is an amazing artist upstairs. It's interesting because Linda Lee, who was a docent and told me so much about her experience being a docent for the 28 Chinese, I said, so which pieces really captured the audience imagination? She says, surprisingly, the calligraphy was really interesting. The calligraphy and the stone sculpture, it represents hundreds of years of propaganda and calligraphy, the style of calligraphy. And the artist investigated these slogans of so many years. And the way in which he printed them, he then entombed them. So it entombed in the sculpture centuries of propaganda posters, in addition to the style of calligraphy. Well, and he's also the one who went to the Yangtze. There's a bridge over the Yangtze River, which he spent a year on a daily basis trying to engage with people that had intention of jumping off the bridge, because it's known as a suicide bridge over the Yangtze River. Now, he wasn't there to tell them not to jump, but he thought that he would engage with them and learn from them. That's why he calls that piece, and that large light bulb is called Darkness Illuminates Me. Thank you, Don. And this is an example of an artist who engages in issues which matter. They're about humanity, and yeah.
On the propaganda piece, the interesting part of it is that although the calligraphy changed over I think there may be almost the 800 or 1,000 years of propaganda, the words were almost always the same. And this is the most shocking thing.
What I learned today from Linda, who did a little research on this, this is really interesting. She told me that one of them says it's okay for some people. In all the propaganda posters were all about liberating how bad it is to be rich, but one of them said it's okay for some of the people to have a little bit more money.
Actually, we are opening an exhibition on the 3rd of September, I'm sorry. First time we're going to show our collection of contemporary art, and one of the works is by Zhu Jingji, who is also the author of The Boat downstairs. Any comments about him, or unfortunately we don't have much more time.
Okay, very quickly. Well, he's just a great painter. I mean, this is an artist. We walked in and saw 30 years of work. I had never sold any of this work. Just a great painter.
Well, the interesting thing is he represents a certain generation in China. For a long time, as the Chinese artists would develop a certain proficiency and expertise, they felt a necessity to go to the West. So he ended up in Düsseldorf. He became well known as part of the Star Group, moved to Düsseldorf, became virtually unknown because was neither accepted in the West or in the East, and then returned to China. Others, like Huang Yangping, stayed in the West. He lives in Paris now. But so many of that earlier generation went to the West. What we found the most striking difference between, for example, 2001, 2008, 2010, is that more and more artists were very content to stay in China and to deal with Chinese subjects, to the Chinese political social system, primarily as their subject matter. And they were no longer making art for export, if you will. They were making art for internal consumption and to affect the people living in China. And that was very striking and obvious as time went on.
I can promise you, if you walked into the studios that we walked into that day and saw the work that we saw, every one of you would have been blown away the way we were blown away. It wasn't like our genius that recognized it. He was just looking at amazing, extraordinary genius. Work for 30 years that just was sitting there, including this, was in one of the warehouses was this boat. I mean, if you see this boat, how could you not be blown away? You know, how could you not be blown away by this art?
And we are very sorry that we could not borrow some of the canvas with 5 meters tall.
There's one painting that is in 3 parts, and each one weighs 1,000 pounds. So it's a little bit complicated.
We could not, basically.
Now this is also okay. Okay, so this was an amazing studio. So those are the chairs that you had downstairs. These were, they basically carried water, they were like wooden aqueducts that carried water for hundreds of years, probably. And these young artists, especially this one, was grabbing and saving and without even knowing what they were going to do with these. But every time they see something, if they see a temple being torn down, there's so much change going on in China that these artists they're preserving they're just preserving and holding with the hopes of kind of reintroducing or saving the history that is part of this destructiveness that's happening in China today. So he hires 100 people for a year and a half to build these smeltering factory kind of, to boil down tons of Coca-Cola. Just imagine, he's going out there and buying all the Coca-Cola he can, these super huge bottles of Coke, and he boils down this Coca-Cola for a year and a half to create a substance that he can then use for like doing sculptures out of this material and drawing with it, using it as a paint, and that's what you see it. This is, in this case, our family. This artist said, I want to capture a portrait of your family, not the physical portrait, but the inside portrait, the emotional portrait, the internal portrait. So he had us all blow into this black bag, and the next thing you know, you see the shape of this black bag, that's the shape of the marble upstairs. This is the portrait of our family, blowing air.
And the Buddhist art gallery.
Wow, this is, yeah, on and on and on. There's so many great stories here, great painters. We couldn't have done this without the brilliant help of gallerists, curators, Phil Tenari. This is Urs Millet with the artist there. Oh, this is in Malin's studio. And every time we went, some of the artists we came back to visit over the 10 years that we traveled there.
This is on the way to Cheng.
Oh, this is a beautiful
studio.
story. So this is in where at the University of
Chengdu.
We came to Chengdu. The slide right before it. So no, forward, the next one. There, no, this one. So this is in 2001, I believe. We're having lunch with the director of the academy there, and he says, I feel like, wow, it's so cool to have an American collectors here. Do you mind coming back in about an hour? I want to introduce you to some of my students. So we come back in an hour, and there are like 2,000 people ready to meet us, which was wild, like really 2,000. And we're there, we end up, it was like a 10-hour marathon because they wouldn't let us off the stage. So what happened, this was so incredible. That's our daughter Jennifer, because she was there in 2001.
The daughter.
She's an artist, so she doesn't want to vote. She doesn't want to be corrupted by our system, the collector system. But she's there. And
well, actually, what happened is when we went there, they asked us to talk, and then we asked, do you have any questions at all? And here are 2,000 students with not a single question. And I think it was, no, Jennifer had the really interesting idea. She said, if you have any questions, write them down. And the next thing, we were bombarded with hundreds and hundreds of questions.
Every single person had a question. What we didn't realize is in China, people at that time, this was 2001, people don't raise their hands and ask questions in public. But as the questions came in, we stayed as long as it took to answer every one of these questions. So we were there like for hours and hours. And of course, every question was translated and translated. But people took all the time of the world, and it was one of the most moving experiences we had in China, interacting in this way with 2,000 kids.
So the obvious question here is, how has Ai Weiwei reacted to these?
Well, the artist He Zhangyu used to make the objects for Ai Weiwei. And Ai Weiwei is such a giant presence in Beijing. I mean, to the extent that Zhang Wan said in order for him to survive as an artist, he had to leave Beijing and go to Shanghai. For He Zhangyu, this was his response to the overwhelming presence.
Didn't he cast them? I mean, this is really so, this had to be cast. We didn't ask that question.
Well, I know his own dead body is not cast, so I assume that.
Okay, we have a few more slides.
Well, this is just, what was the question? I'm sorry.
How did you react to it?
How did who react?
Ai
Weiwei is an incredible supporter of his, the artists are so engaged with him and in such awe of him. And he's extremely
also a narcissist.
Well, no, but he's very but he's very supportive. He's supportive of all the it's impossible to be an artist in Beijing without engaging with Ai Weiwei. He's very supportive of other artists. He has collaborative studios with them. He's a giant, and yeah. So this is a lazy Susan meal in 2001 with Ai Weiwei. Tremendously generous and available to communicate and share and introduce us to young artists from, in Beijing at the time.
Any questions from the public? I think we could go hours and hours, but I think it's about time to give you.
Do we have to give you paper to write it down?
No. Mark, do you have anything to ask, since you are the organizer of the event? And,
I get such privilege. I guess maybe a question when you were first starting out and the experiences of starting to go out to studios, speaking with artists. Were there any things that you learned very, very quickly on how to conduct yourself in an artist studio?
That's an interesting question.
That's a very good question. Well, the most for us, a studio visit is it's at the core of learning who the artist is and sensing that, just sensing whether this is someone we should commit ourselves to. Now, it's not always necessary to meet the artist, but with very young artists, just spending that time in the studio and talking about their dreams and talking about their work and feeling, just the studio reveals a lot.
Well, there are really no great young artists. The most you could ever hope for is it's a person who has the potential to be a very good or a great artist. And an artist is much more than the painting or the sculpture, And what you try and feel in the studio is the essence of the artist. You know?
Look, we were in
where his ideas, where his ambitions, where his feelings are. That's all you can hope to get.
Look, we fell in love. For example, there's this incredible artist by the name of Mary Weatherford. She's probably 50, I don't know, 55 now. And we fell in love with her work without ever meeting her or talking to her. We just happened to be collecting. We don't always meet the artists. We collected her work, loved her work. And in the last 2 weeks, we had occasion to hear her speak, have dinner with her. It just so happens that we were in the same place at the same time, and we ended up spending some time together. And being in her studio for the first time, even though we had already bought the work, it was so eye-opening to learn about where it all comes from and who she, and when that moment of inspiration came to her that transformed her work from being an artist who really never was fully recognized into an artist that has just emerged as really a big, like a major, in our opinion.
She went from being a very good artist to possibly someday becoming a great artist. Can't ask for more than that.
But being in that studio, you can see the traces. She showed us these drawings that started. For 2 years, she discovered this one cave near the Pacific in LA, and she was just for 2 years. She was just in this cave drawing for 2 years, drawing the cave itself. And she said, coming after that experience, she emerged understanding the work she had to make. And yeah, and the work she had to make was... So the studio is like the inner sanctum of an artist's mind in a way. But you don't, it shouldn't be like a place you go shopping. You shouldn't go there for shopping. You should go there for, I want to get to know you. Otherwise, it's demoralizing to everybody because it's so intimate.
Yes, at the end.
This is working. Thank you for coming for this conversation. I'm one of the docents, and many of the people who came on the tour just happened to be coming to the museum, not specifically to see the exhibition per se, but because the tour time was available for them, they came on the tour. And I have to say that most of them, when they came, they had no knowledge, no interest in Chinese art, a bit, contemporary Chinese art. But after the tour, they were really blown away by what they saw. So it's a compliment to your collection. And also, thank you for acknowledging our internal staff, because it also took 400 volunteers to put the boat together. And that's the kind of community that we have here at the Asian Art Museum. But my question is focused to Dr. Rubell. Did you want to be a painter before you became a doctor, or someone in your family was a painter?
Actually, that's a really, really interesting question, because in the last 2 years, Mira has taken courses in sculpture with Huma Baba and in painting, and it's really enlightened her to a great extent. I have never had the ambition to be a painter. I have never had the ambition. I love reading. I read 3 to 4 books every week. I have never had the ambition to be a writer, because I have all of these incredible writers that can teach me so much, and I don't have so much to teach anybody else. So I'd rather read their stories than hear mine.
But my painting class, let me say, this is just a few weeks ago, I took a painting class. I think every collector needs a certificate that they've taken an art class, because only when you try to make something do you understand what it takes to create the kind of magic that we see artists make every day. So I'm completely humbled, and I'm fascinated, and I hope to continue to challenge myself, but it's very difficult, and I'm far more respectful of artists than I ever was trying to paint something myself.
I waited on tables for 4 years, and as a result, I always overtip when I'm in a restaurant. The difficulty is, and since Mira has taken this course, there's something sympathetic in every artist studio we visit. And, and it's become making life a little difficult. But I agree with it.
Well, I like asking. Now I have a few technical questions I'm curious about. Like, I'm very interested, you know, what is the surface? What is the paint? What is, you know, like, they're real questions, you know?
How did you manage to stay as humble, simple, and generous collectors? Because usually collectors, great collectors like you are difficult people. I'm not saying that you are not. I'm not saying that you are not at all. But what I'm saying is that you have been so generous since we approached you.
Let's put it this way. We have to, okay, tomorrow Don goes back to Miami. I go to DC and Baltimore. We're still working people. I mean, if you want to continue to collect art, you just have to, we're working people, really. We are really working people. So,
how
okay,
many?
I have a confession.
Wonderful.
For years, at least 3 or 4 times a week, I would have the same dream. And the dream always took the form that we were looking at the art over here, but the great art was really being seen over there.
but I wake him up and tell him, Don.
Yeah, there's no waking up. I mean, you're right, you're wrong. I mean, who knows?
There's no right and wrong. I hate that, Don. This I disagree. There's no right and wrong in collecting.
As long as she's ever gone without disagreeing.
No, I mean, there's no, I hate when people say, oh, did you make a mistake? I mean, what is the mistake? I mean, you go into the world, you meet amazing people, talented people. You have the privilege of being maybe the first person to recognize that talent, which is in itself this incredible privilege because, wow, to see talent and give that talent a voice, meaning, you know, we bring them back to Miami, we show them, we talk about them to the world. I mean, how, it doesn't get more privileged than that. You know, it's like, it's the greatest feeling to say, wow, I can, but it's extremely selfish in a way. It's not, we're not like doing anybody a favor. We are really enjoying every minute of this. And as long as we can keep doing it, it doesn't, it's...
And we are enjoying to have you. One more question. Ma'am?
You seem to collect so many artists, and you get to know them personally, you go to their studios, and I've heard you say about a couple artists that you saw their work and give them 5 years. I'm curious if you have a system of revisiting a lot of these artists in 5 years, or do they invite you?
Yeah. I'll tell you another Keith Haring. Keith Haring has always been one of our favorite artists, so there are a lot of stories around him. When we first met Keith Haring, he was a curator at a show at the Mud Club. It was a graffiti show. And you see some people around.
1978.
Yeah. So we went, we met him, and we were really impressed with him. And we said, we'd like to see some of these artists. He said, well, if you'll meet me at 3 o'clock in the morning, we can go up to the train depots in the Bronx and Harlem and see them. And we went up with him, and at the end of the night, we weren't as impressed with the graffiti artists, but we were very impressed with him.
As a curator.
As a curator, and we said, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm an artist. And we said, we'd love to see your work. He said, it's not ready to be seen yet. So we said,
like, well, 2 years later, we get a call.
When you think it's ready to be seen, let us know. 2 years later, we get a call from someone, his Keith Haring. He says,
Keith Haring. I said, who?
And he said, well, it's ready to be seen now. And this has happened a lot of times where we say, look, when it's ready, call us. And the amazing thing is artists know when it's ready. Doing art is a very long process. But the artist knows when they hit upon something that's really it.
Can we ask one more question? One last question?
Please.
I read somewhere that among your over 6,000 collections, you only sold 20 pieces-ish. Is that correct?
You know, yeah, we buy hundreds of pieces a year, and sometimes we are compelled to sell a piece. And we do what, I now understand the difference in selling or deaccessioning. You know, like museums don't say we sell, they say they deaccession. So what does deaccession mean? It means that, like to put together this exhibition that we did of the 28 Chinese, once we got into it, we realized that we just didn't, it was bigger than what we anticipated. So we sold a piece of an artist that we bought in the 80s, that we had probably 20 other pieces. It wasn't the best piece, it was a very good piece. And interestingly enough, this happened to be an artist who, you know, appreciated enough that for selling that one piece allowed us to acquire this entire, you know, like really focus on these 28 Chinese. Now we're focusing on the woman's show. So it will be artists that have been in our collection 40 years, 30 years, 20 years, and an artist that we are going to acquire, you know, that we acquired yesterday. And in the next few months, there will be a big attention, and it might be that we'll see some artists that will push us to the limit where we'll say, wait a minute, maybe we need to sell one of many things that we have that would allow us to go forward. So that's what occasionally we do sell, we have to, because, you know, we're working people.
But the biggest reason for selling year in, year out has been the IRS. Because we always manage to spend all the money we're supposed to pay taxes for, and occasionally no way to put it together, and so we have to sell something to pay the IRS.
Fortunately, we buy many other works. Well, this was an immense privilege. Thank you very much for your generosity, for lending your artworks, and for coming back. So thank you.